Hi everybody. I am doing something different this week. I decided to do a video in response to your discussion post. I just read through your discussion on PTSD and I find it pretty interesting. Well, actually I find it very interesting. It's an interesting diagnosis and it comes in a lot of forms. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that and my experience with diagnosing and treating PTSD. And y'all know probably by now that I tend to be sometimes a little cynical um, about things. And I think while the thing on the video that y'all saw about the abnormal psychology video website, it says that only 8%, or 85%, I forget what the numbers are, but anyway, 8% of the people who have traumatic events happen. That's what it is. Like the high number of people have traumatic events, but then only 8% actually develop PTSD. Now, I will say that I think it's going to be growing. It's going to be increasing because we're seeing a lot of people now that it's a recognized disorder and there's a lot of treatment out there. We're going to, I think, see more and more people presenting with PTSD for one reason or another. And, where I get a little cynical sometimes, and I'm not saying that I distrust clients or that I think we should, overanalyze things, but I think sometimes what I've discovered is people, especially with all the information that's out there these days, know what the symptoms are and they know what something's supposed to look like, and so they present. I had a guy, just for an example, I had a guy who came to me when I worked at AIDS Outreach Center who said he was dissociative. He had dissociative identity disorder, DID. And I tell you, that guy knew exactly how he was supposed to act, and he would, his different multiple personalities, his different parts would show up at different times. And he's a really smart guy, but we kind of, all of us, got together and said, we don't get that he really has DID. Now, you don't want to, just assume that somebody's faking, but it does happen. And so I think that we really have to be careful. I've worked a lot, still do work with people who are transgender, and I see that a lot with young, particularly young transgender. I'd say late teens or college age, who've read what the symptoms are, and they come to me. They don't get, I guess, realize that I know as much as I do about it. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I just happened, that's what I did my dissertation on. But anyway, they don't realize, and so they'll come and say all these things, and it's like, well, they've read the diagnosis criteria, and or talk to other people and stuff like that. So I'm not saying it's not legitimate, and I'm not saying that and maybe all of them are legitimate. I think we just have to be really cautious, because I think sometimes people take advantage of the system. And anyway, so much for that. So I guess I'm a little cynical, and I don't mean to be. I'm not really cynical. I'm not a cynical person in life in general. It's just, I guess, when when you see things a lot, then you start thinking about it a little bit, and kind of questioning sometimes. But anyway, PTSD, you'll see a lot of it. I think you'll see more of it. I just talked to somebody the other night who has been a counselor for years, LPC, or mental health counselor, and she's getting ready to take a course in working with the government and working with military families and military individuals, because she's a MHC, so she'll mostly be probably working with individuals. But very many of her people that she sees, I'm sure, will present with PTSD. And the government is really developing, very proactive in their programs that they're developing to help people who come back from being deployed who are experiencing PTSD symptoms. And it's not just PTSD; they come back with a lot of other things too. But that's one of the seems like one that we see a lot. But also, it's not just military people. There's a lot of the people that I saw, say, for instance, when I was at the AIDS Outreach Center, I saw a lot of the people I saw had been abused as children. There were women who came in, straight women, heterosexual women, who had been infected by men, and they had experienced just massive amounts of physical and sexual abuse, verbal, emotional, everything, their whole lives. And so they, presented with PTSD symptoms, and that's what we diagnosed them. And so it can look like different things. I think we think a lot at times about war veterans and military people, but it can happen in other things. And I'm sure, for instance, let's say 9/11, or people who survived the Oklahoma City bombing, things like that. How traumatic that is or was, and so those are things like that where people can experience a trauma, and like the person on the video said, not always when somebody experiences a trauma like that are they going to develop the symptoms of PTSD, but they do, and like I said, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. Back in the day, I remember as a kid, my father, people his age were World War II vets, and they called it shell shock then. And I remember knowing a couple people who were shell shocked, but it was really PTSD. They just didn't have the name for it back then. And then there were people in the Vietnam War who came back, and I think that's really when people started really paying attention to what the effects of war could have on someone, on their mental health. And so that's when, not really during the Vietnam War, but in many years since, have we really started paying attention to what happens to people when they're over there and when they come back. And I think the guy on there said, when he came back from war, he was not respected. People who came back from Vietnam, just coming back from Vietnam wasn't traumatic enough, not even what went on over there for them. So, of course, they had suffered a trauma over there and here. And so, anyway, that's affected the individual and their families. And that's from, being a family therapist, I think it's really important for us to address the families of the people who have been in war or have suffered a trauma, because the families suffer as well. And a lot of times they suffer because they don't know how to help their loved one. So I saw a lot of people at AOC who had other kinds of trauma happen to them. And the way I've worked with that more than I have war people who've been deployed, and so that's where most of my experience is with PTSD. And you also know that I'm not big on medication. However, very often people who suffer from PTSD do need medication. They need, especially in the short run, at least, to get them to where they can at least manage themselves first, and then we can start working on the other symptoms. But a lot of times they're very, very anxious, and they need some kind of anti-anxiety medication, and also depressed. Things have changed since they've come back home, and a lot of times they're not accepted back in their circle as much because things have changed, and so they can be depressed. So there are different kinds of medications that we can't prescribe, but we can recommend they seek help with a psychiatrist. And so there's that. Some of y'all mentioned that. You mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a very effective tool for people who are experiencing symptoms of PTSD. that's one of the best things that we've found to help them be aware of their behaviors. I've seen people act out horribly on other people, a lot of anger, some violence, violent behaviors, and things like that. So they need to, help be made aware of how their behaviors are affecting other people. And this is not a fast process. This is not something that's going to be a quick fix. This isn't necessarily a solution-focused brief therapy type of mental illness or diagnosis. And, that's a little bit scary because a lot of the insurance companies are really limiting the numbers of sessions that people can have. And if somebody only gets 6 or 8 sessions, that's really not going to be enough, I don't think, to really help somebody who suffers from PTSD. Now, the government, I'm thinking the government is going to be more realistic about that and pay for longer term therapy. At the AIDS Outreach Center where I worked, we didn't really have a limit for how long we could see people. We were funded by Medicare and Medicaid, but we were also privately funded because it was a nonprofit organization, so we got a lot of money, not a lot of money, but some money from other people, foundations and things to help offset the cost of working with the clients for however long it took. And if any of y'all work for nonprofits, you know that there's not a lot of money in it, but it's a very rewarding, usually a very rewarding experience. And so anyway, it takes a while to help people work through this. The guy on the video talked about desensitization, systematic desensitization, and I haven't had a lot of experience with that, and partly because I don't necessarily haven't had the time necessarily to work with somebody like that in that way. I see some value in it. I think you have to practice doing that with people because it's a little bit scary to me to think about exposing people to their fears. Although he did talk about doing some visualization and imagery, I think that's probably really good. I have studied hypnotherapy, and the things that he was doing with the client, Carl, it reminded me of some techniques that I learned in hypnotherapy. So that's a good thing if any of y'all are interested in that. And it's not a hokey thing. It's actually, was it Erickson? I forget who did that. Used hypnotherapy in their practice, but it's been around a long time, and it's a good thing. It's not hypnosis where you make your clients cluck like chickens. It's actually a pretty powerful tool, and so I see that could be something that would be very helpful with some of those desensitizing things that you might do with your client. So talking to them, working with the family, very important, working with the family to help the family understand and to learn how they can help their person who's struggling. And let's see what else. Lower income families seem to have a little bit harder time because they have less support, and so I don't know. I just wrote that down for some reason. Maybe somebody mentioned that in a post, or maybe I saw it on that website. I think it's important to talk about feelings, although that might be kind of hard for some people. It is hard for some people. It's hard for a lot of people. But I'm a feelings person, so I think it's good to get those feelings out, to talk about those things. Stress reduction, helping them do, some of y'all mentioned doing relaxation techniques and meditation and things like that. Really good to do. Because I think ultimately the goal is to get people off medication. I don't think it's necessarily, except for certain diagnoses, access to, for instance, we've had that discussion, that perhaps that's a lifelong thing. But I'd like to think that people can recover from PTSD, or at least be able to get off medication. I don't know. I don't know for sure, and I'm not going to hold a hard, fast line on that one. So I think that's really about it. I think I'm running out of time. Y'all take care and have a great Thanksgiving if I don't talk to you sooner.